Boom, and we're live. I'm Chris Grimes, and this is Jon Plowman. This is a very special live recording of the Good Listening To show, Stories of Distinction and Genius. A slight false beginning, so I've just got to press a button on LinkedIn, which gives a tiny snag. Just a minute. Hold the line. I'm waiting for the button to go live. It's doing it. That's all good. So I'm going to go live again now because Instagram makers do a bit of a false one. Anyway, going live in 3, 2, 1, boom. Welcome to a very exciting trophy day in the Good Listening To show, Stories of Distinction and Genius. I'm thrilled and delighted to the point of almost some wee coming out to welcome Jon Plowman, OBE. You're also known as Philip Jon Plowman. I know you know that a bit. Norman Stanley Fletcher.
Yeah.
Matt Lucas has called you back in the day the godfather of comedy. You're an OBE, and I thought when I started to research you, I knew about you anyway, but I thought, oh, blinking heck, which is the OBE, because you've actually comedy produced practically everything I've watched since 1980.
Well, either comedy produced or exec produced, and exec produced is different. Exec produced is you're the person people ring to moan at. Whereas producing is trying to get it in on time and on budget.
Yes, but I mean, it's just all the televisual bangers you can possibly think of. The Office, Ab Fab, Vicar of Dibley. I'm so excited I can barely speak. But anyway, I got in touch with you about a year ago on LinkedIn, and you're if I may say, you're a complete pussycat. You said yes straight away.
I'm a sucker. I'm A, egotist, B, sucker.
Yes, and thank you for both of those endeavors, because I'm thrilled to have you here. It is my great. So, how's morale? What's your story of the day, Jon Plowman?
Story of the day is I'm amazed that I'm here, because I always have this fear with computery things that something will mean that it breaks. You know, that something I press will mean that the computer starts smoking, and/or that it just goes black, and me and nothing else are ever seen again. So, hooray!
Yeah, and may I commend you if you're head of IT?
So far, it hasn't happened.
Yes, you were here early. If I can just blow some extra happy smoke at you. And
you see.
Can I congratulate you on your head of IT, who wasn't 7 years old? He's your partner. And how old is your partner?
Same age as I am.
Yes, and if I may, yes, would you like to tell us how old you are?
Oh, I'm 71. God help us.
Yes. Well, I think you started. You started. You know when you started, but you started comedy producing circa 1980, I believe it was, with the Russell Harty show, and then the rest really is history.
Yeah, I would say that I started a little bit before that, because I started work. I started doing something I got paid for first at the Royal Court Theatre in London, and that was on a comedy. That was on a revival of What the Butler Saw by Joe Orton, directed by Lindsay Anderson, who thankfully employed me as his assistant. So I started a bit earlier, really.
Of course. And being 71, you did start a lot earlier. I get that. But the really extraordinary thing is that, everything that I have loved watching on TV, your name all my life has been on the end of the credits. And that's why
I'm always entirely jealous of John Lloyd for that, because I think he made everything that I watched.
Okay. So that's the Dad's Army sort of territory. That was the sort of the circuit.
He did do Blackadder.
Right. Sure. Oh, and talking of Blackadder, Ben Elton, I saw a week ago, and I met Jeff Posner on the same event. And should we cover off a story where Jeff Posner had a request for you?
Yeah, go on.
Jeff Posner said, and when I said, I'm going to be meeting and working with Jon Plowman in a week, he said, ask him to tell you the story of David Walliams's jacket. So over to you.
Okay. This is during a recording of Little Britain. And the sketch is being recorded one afternoon. I didn't know this. I'm in my office being head of the department, I think, at the time. Phone goes, could you come down to settle an argument between Matt and Dave, which might or might not have been the first time that had happened. And so I went down, and the contentious thing was it was a sketch in which the Prime Minister, and this could not be maybe more topical, the Prime Minister is having a meeting with the American president, and they may or may not be doing the beast with two backs, as it were.
Yes.
We don't see that. They go off into their office, and anyway. And when let me get this right. Well, I guess it must have been Dave, comes out, he has a stain on his jacket lapel.
A Monica Lewinsky-esque type stain.
You might say that. I couldn't possibly. Anyway, and they said the contentious question was, how big could this stain be? To which I said, and I think it was Solomon-esque, I said it should be big enough to be noticeable and clear what it is, but not so big that it's offensive. And I think that's the role of the executive producer. So summed up right there. That's it.
The thin dividing line between genius and disaster. I love that.
Maybe.
Yes.
Run onto the floor and you sort things out.
Thank you for sharing. And Tony Head, of course, I remember was playing the part of the Prime Minister.
He was.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing that story. Before we started, I said, "Is that something I can ask you?" Yes, I can tell you that story. So thank you for sharing that.
That's all right.
So thank you for sharing your story of the day. It is my great delight and pleasure to now curate you through the journey and the structure of the Good Listening To show. Okay. It's the show in which, just to position this for our audience, the billions that are watching on the old interweb, it's the show in which I invite movers, makers, shakers, mavericks, influencers, and also personal heroes into a clearing or serious happy place of my guests' choosing, as they all share with us their stories of distinction and genius. You fit right in, Jon, to all of those endeavors, particularly the comedy genius bit. So let's get you on the open road. Any questions before we start that?
No, not yet.
Like that. Jon Plowman, executive producer. What is a clearing for you? Where would you say you go to get clutter-free, inspirational, and able to think?
Well, I mean, there were two or three places I thought of. One is we have a house in Somerset. We have a seat in the garden. I thought, well, maybe. The other was a place called Sherard's Wood in Welwyn in Hertfordshire, which was where I went when I was tiny. And indeed, I remember it being a place where I first saw a dumped porn magazine. Woodrow Vale over there. So the place I'm actually going for is in the French Pyrenees, in a département called the Ariège, at the end of a village called Buzan, Buzan.
Yeah.
And I think I'm in a hammock there above the house under a plum tree, which, believe it or not, does have plums. And I'm looking kind of straight down the valley of the Boulogne, and at the end, which has it has a little river going through it. It also has a road, and on the right-hand side of me is a mountain called the Moussaillou, and legend has it or myth, that it's called Moussaillou because it used to be a place where there were a lot of bears. And if you were sensible, you called the bear Monsieur, and Monsieur's got somehow, extrapolated over the years into Moussaillou, and you called him Monsieur Bear if you had any sense and you tried to be polite to the bear so he didn't eat you. So that's over there, and in front of me is the highest mountain in the area, which is called Mont Vallier, and usually, not always, but usually has a bit of snow on the top. And it also has the French border somewhere near, the French-Spanish border somewhere near it. So I'm in a hammock under a plum tree.
Ooh. Can I just thank you for painting the most glorious vista That was storytelling magic right there. We skirted over the dumped pornography magazine. That was back in the
dumped plums.
And yes, there's some connection between the magazine and plums, but we won't go there now. So thank you for the hammock. That's brilliant.
That's all
right. I'm now going to arrive a bit deliberately existentially waiting for Godot-esque with a tree now next to your hammock, if I may. And I'm going to shake your tree to see which storytelling apples fall out. How'd you like these apples? And this is where you've been kind enough, Jon Plowman, comedy executive producer and comedy legend, to have thought about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things that never fail to grab your attention, and borrow from the film Up. That will be a bit, oh, squirrels, what are your shiny object syndrome that you never fail to distract you. And then the one is a quirky or unusual fact about you. It's not a memory test. I was just reminding the audience what this is. You look relieved. And so now it's up to you to shake the canopy of your tree as you see fit.
Well, as I see fit involves, in some cases, the things that fall out of the tree are people. And in other cases, they're things.
Lovely.
Makes sense.
And thank you for your research in all of this. I'm really chuffed with how much you've obviously thought about this.
So things that shaped me. Well, if we could start with the earliest television I did, which was at Granada, not, as some will think, the motorway service station, but the television station in Manchester. And the first thing I worked on was a Saturday morning kids show. Some may remember a show called Tiswas. This was Tiswas' summer replacement. It was called Fun Factory, and believe me, it wasn't.
Oh, the irony. I love that.
And I was one of a number of researchers on the show, and also in Vision, curiously. I mean, to go straight into... Anyway, in Vision, because all the researchers had to wear different colored boiler suits in order to push small children around. Well, not very small children, but reasonably large children around from place to place to make sure the cameras and everything got them. And amongst the not necessarily wonderful television that occurred was the first TV appearance by a man called Jeremy Beadle, God help us, who was doing the things that only Jeremy Beadle can do, which involve a tiny hand and a normal size hand. And the other person who was one of the other people who was on the show was a man called Gary Bushell. Now, yes. Gary Bushell was Gary Bushell was a TV critic for The Sun. I apologize for even mentioning him. A guy called Gary who was the sort of DJ on the show. And he clearly, his attitude to children was questionable, not in a kind of dodgy way, but just in a kind of, he somehow thought he was superior. And so there was at the time a band called, believe it or not, Vaughan Toulouse. And Vaughan Toulouse was a punkish band. And Vaughan Toulouse was the lead singer. And Gary and Vaughan Toulouse had a bet that that Gary wouldn't say the word bollocks live on television on Saturday morning to a childlike audience. Gary lost the bet and was almost immediately sacked and replaced by somebody else. Anyway. So that's the beginning of my television career.
But that was obviously very formative and seminal because it was the moment of like extraordinary sort of juxtapositions going on set in the chaos of entertainment.
And little did I realize that a lot of television is chaos and entertainment in sometimes equal measures, sometimes not. I suppose if I'm doing 4 things, am I doing 4? Yeah, 4.
Yes, it's 4 shapeages.
Another one is getting into Oxford University. I was very lucky enough to how I ever achieved this from a state school in Welwyn Garden City to get into Oxford reading I Shall Never Know. A story I absolutely remember is that my interview to get into Oxford took place during a power cut. And during this power cut, we were in the dark in a room where I was sitting at a desk where in front of me, quite a long way in front of me, were 3 or possibly 4 professors. They had candles. I didn't, and I think that's the reason I got in, because they could sort of hear me, but not see me. I think the other reason I got in was the usual thing of thinking, oh, hooray, here's somebody who's not from a public school and doesn't really know what he's talking about. So we'd better take him in.
And also, it's historically and brilliantly the halcyon days of Oxford, because back in the day, it would have all been by candlelight. But of course, this was a power cut.
Yeah, it's not that long ago. There was electricity available normally, but on this occasion, it wasn't.
So there's this sort of comedy of disruption there, because it wasn't the usual or the norm, and that's what surprised everybody. And then you were surprised to get in.
Yeah, exactly. The next place I was surprised to get in was the Royal Court Theatre in Sloane Square in London, where for some reason I was taken on by a brilliant director called Lindsay Anderson, who some may or may not remember, made a wonderful film called If, which starred Malcolm McDowell and involved essentially involved 6 formers at a public school shooting the headmaster amongst other people. It's a very good film. He was a very good director. He was a very good theatre director, and he was a very good film director. And I was fantastically lucky. I can't, I sort of, I cannot quite understand why this, this guy from Welwyn was put into this very prestigious theatre in I was going to say in the West End, not in the West End, it's in Chelsea. But I was offered a place by a man called Oscar Lowenstein, who ran the court at the time, and who said, well, now I have to be careful here, because this end of the story will involve people that your audience may or may not have heard of. The person in this instance is Mel Smith. Mel Smith was one half of a comedy duo, Smith and Jones, the other half being Griff Rhys-Jones, a good mate. But anyway, just to explain, Mel had been an assistant director at the Royal Court before, just about 6 months before me, and he was good and knew what he was doing. And but he also got very easily and very quickly bored because his job there had been looking after something bizarre called the Tokyo Kid Brothers, which was a Japanese theatre company. And Mel, was a very energetic and lively guy, and didn't really want, these guys knew what they were doing. They went onto the stage, they did what they did, they came off, so Mel didn't really have anything to do. And so, cut long story short, Oscar Lowenstein, when he talked to me about joining the court, said, I can only offer you a job if you promise not to be like Mel Smith. So
and was this to be an acting? Was this
in my career? I produced Smith and Jones. Neither here nor there. Sorry, carry on.
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. What was the position you were offered? Was it sort of an
the Royal Court had a very good assistant director scheme, And the point of the assistant director scheme was partly to do things in the theatre upstairs, which was the little theatre above the main theatre, and was also to assist with productions being done by older and greater people than us, as it were, in this case. And in fact, the person, this was, you know, it was all weird, but I remember the weirdest thing almost of the Royal Court experience was being summoned to the Royal Court by somebody coming into, stay with me, the pub I was working in. I was working in a pub in the evenings where at lunchtime a play I'd written was going on.
Yeah.
And this lady came into the bar because I was working behind the bar just in order to make enough money for the train home and stuff. Anyway, I was behind the bar, and she's this very nice lady who turned out to be Oscar Lewinstein's PA, came in and said, "Is there any chance you could come in tomorrow and meet Albert?" And I, in my relative naivety, said, "Albert who?" She said, "Albert Finney." Albert Finney was also directing a Joe Orton play in the season. Albert decided against me. Fair enough. Albert decided against me, but next in line was Lindsay Anderson, who was perfectly happy. I think perfectly happy because Lindsay was he was a dynamic guy, and he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew. I remember him once saying that he'd had an assistant who had refused to go and get him a chopped liver sandwich from the bar opposite the theatre in Soho, and because he'd refused that, Lindsay had fired him, and I just thought, well, yeah, stupid guy, really, because, you know, if a salt beef sandwich helps the production by allowing Lindsay to be there and direct this thing, then I'll go and get a salt beef sandwich.
Yes.
Sorry. I've hardly scratched the surface. Go on.
No. Wonderful. So it's first jobs that really, it's those doors that first open, and sliding doors moments of your life.
And they are, because they're the things that lead to other things.
Yes.
Because having done something at the Royal Court, that means that the next person you go and say any chance of a job doesn't think, "Oh my God, this person doesn't know what they're doing." They think, "Oh, somewhere nice has employed him." The fact that he might have been rubbish at that place, doesn't matter. You've got a bit of a stamp, you know.
Yes. And did I make this up? But you knew Mel Smith before because he directed you in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead.
He did. Well, yeah, that sounds far grander than it is. I knew Mel because Mel and I were at university at exactly the same time. He was at New College, Oxford. I was at University College, Oxford. And Mel directed a production of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, after which he refused. He said he was going to refuse to ever cast me in anything again, because he'd cast me as Leontes. And do I mean Leontes? Anyway,
Laertes. Sorry, you're talking about Hamlet or Rosencrantz and Guildenstern?
Yes, old man in Hamlet. Help me.
Polonius.
Polonius. He'd cast me as Polonius. Sorry, memory game. He'd cast me as Polonius. And the keen-eyed amongst you may remember that Polonius doesn't have a very big part. And so I thought, I know how I can make this a bit better for me, not for the audience, not for anybody else, not for anybody studying. Anyway, I know I can do this. I can put some talcum powder in my hair, grey hair, old guy, and it means that every time I bump into anybody, there will be clouds out of my head. Anyway, I then decided that really he hadn't got enough lines, and that a way maybe of increasing the number of lines was was by saying all the lines more than once. So my first entrance, I think, was the ambassadors. Anyway, let's go with what the line was. The ambassadors from Norway, my good liege, joyfully arrived. I decided it was better and showed age to my the ambassadors from the ambassadors from Norway, my good liege, are joyfully arrived. Now, so, having lost any sense of artistic credibility, it all having gone out of the window.
Or iambic pentameter. I love that.
Yes, exactly. Mel said, I'll never cast you in anything again. In fact, later that same year he did, but that's because he was a good guy.
Well, you ended up doing Smith and Jones, so I think that the partnership was made in heaven.
He'd forgiven us enough.
Yes. That's a lovely.
I've forgotten that. Sorry.
Yes, you're welcome. So I've eked it out of you. You'd forgotten that, but it's back in. That's lovely. So we're still in the canopy of the tree doing the 4 things that have shaped you. We've had 2 very profound.
How many have we done? We've done the Royal Court, we've done telly, we've done Getting into Oxford. The one last one, I guess, is meeting my partner, who I met in 19 at Oxford a long time ago. And I met him via, I mean, he was an undergraduate, and so was I. But I'd very stupidly promised a little theatre group who went from Oxford every year to the Edinburgh Festival. I'd promised, I don't know, somehow I was on some committee or that. Anyway, I promised that I would write a play. Why I ever thought I could or should write a play, I know not. But I somehow had come across, I can't remember how, I'd come across the story of J.M. Barrie. Now, J.M. Barrie was the writer of Peter Pan and had an very interesting backstory, which a bit later became a television thing called The Lost Boys with Ian Holm.
Ian Holm, lovely, yeah.
Sorry,
I said Ian Holm because it was a happy mumble. You mumbled Ian Holm, but he's such an iconically wonderful.
Yes, one shouldn't mumble Ian Holm. A very good Bilbo Baggins.
Yes, my favourite.
Anyway,
yes.
So I thought I could do a play because it's Scottish. Edinburgh helps, and B, I could see a way, sort of, in which it could be done with just 2 people, and so I did something I've never done since, and probably shouldn't have done at the time, but curiously had a connection to how we ended up doing Absolutely Fabulous. I would go to the Edinburgh University Library in the morning and sit at a desk and try and come up with something, which in the afternoon we would rehearse. It's not the ideal way of constructing anything. But anyway, I wrote this thing and was lucky enough to get very nice reviews. I got a particularly nice review from Harold Hobson, theatre critic of the Sunday Times, who said something to the effect of the sad music of Plowman, Barrie, and Churchill resonates through the theatres. Now, it should be said the Plowman and Plowman easy. Churchill is Carol Churchill, not Winston.
Yeah.
And
thanks for clarifying.
Yes. But it was a wonderful review to have. I entirely undeserved and unexpected and amazed. And as a result, the play went down to the King's Head Theatre, and the King's Head Theatre was where the woman came in and said, "Would you like to come and meet Albert?" In other words, it rolled on.
Yes, wonderful. So sliding doors is the recurring theme, and Wonderful. So is that 4 shapeages, I believe, and now we're on to 3 things that inspire you, Jon Plowman.
3 things that, well, this is where I think I'm cheating, because they're 3 people rather than 3 things, and the 3 people are, first, a brilliant director called Ronald Eyre. Ronald Eyre, not to be confused with another brilliant director called Richard Eyre, but anyway, Ron was probably the wisest man I've ever met, and in many ways the nicest. He was as I said, was a theatre director who did amongst other things a wonderful play by Dion Boucicault called London Assurance. He did a brilliant version of Much Ado About Nothing at the Royal Shakespeare Company with Judi Dench and Donald Sinden, God help us, and he did, as some of your viewers may remember or may not, a rather good television series called The Long Search. And The Long Search was a sort of, it was an 8-part, I think, things were in those days, documentary series about world religion. And anyway, a good guy, a very good guy, who, apart from anything else, gave me a rather good gag that was later used in AbFab, which occurred when he and somebody else were the dress rehearsal for a show that he was doing, I think in Chichester, hadn't gone terribly well, and so he and his designer had a bit to drink at the end of the evening, and who can blame them? And they both went out to get in the car, and essentially Ron got in the wrong side of the car, and oh my God, somebody's stolen the steering wheel.
That was reincorporated beautifully into AbFab, I remember. Yes,
sort of by accident. I mean, I hasten to add, very, very infrequently was anything put directly in by me, but I think that was anyway. So we've got Ron Eyre. That's one.
Yeah.
Bob Spears is the next. Bob Spears directed Absolutely Fabulous. He also directed the whole of the second series of Fawlty Towers. He also directed Dad's Army. He and he and I did Bottom. He directed. I produced. I've written down some other things. Fawlty Towers, Bottom. Yeah, Comic Strip Presents. Friar and Laurie. You know, Bob knew what he was doing, and he was a very good director, and he was a good director partly because he didn't want things. He wanted things, if possible, not to look like sitcoms.
Yeah,
sitcom is essentially a form where you've got a set which has got 3 walls. The 4th wall is the audience.
Yeah.
The cameras are between, usually, the audience and the action. And that's how traditionally it's done. But Bob rightly didn't want everything, that what that means is everything ends up looking a bit the same, and artificial.
Yeah.
And so Bob became very, very good at putting cameras in bizarre places. Anyone who's seen stuff that happens in the kitchen anyone who's seen things that happen in the kitchen in AbFab may have seen them via a camera that poked through the window that was above the sink. So Sappy goes, let's say, to do some washing up. Mother's with her. The angle is through the window, and if you then want in a minute or two to shoot the other way and see the sink of the kitchen, it means the camera has to move pretty quick and a bit of scenery has to go back in. But somehow that happened.
Yes.
Somehow Bob made it happen, and he was just great.
So he created a new vocabulary, a sort of pioneering new way.
I mean, I don't know whether it was, whether it was something he'd used on lots of other things. He may well have done, but I didn't start working with him until French and Saunders. And I remember the first time he and I sort of worked together. It was going to last a few years, but the first time we worked together was he and I went down the road to a little room, a pokey room, it should be said, in Hammersmith, where Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders were supposedly writing a series that was going to start filming in about 3 weeks, let's say. And they knew we were coming. Bob and I went down to see what problems were they going to offer us, and indeed what joys were they going to offer us. We go into this pokey room, and on the wall, 3, possibly 4 yellow post-it notes of ideas.
As many as that.
So as many as that.
Yeah.
And there's worked out of that. Have you got a script for these 3 or 4 ideas? Well, no, we bounce things off each other, and I mean it was startling. It was kind of, it was a learning experience, if nothing else, to see that this is how it was going to be, and that the office was also, as people might remember, surrounded by copies of OK magazine and Hello magazine.
And just to plant that, I mean, that is so seminal, The Office, in everybody's consciousness, because that's crossed the Atlantic and I know Ab Fab's global too, but I mean, they're pretty iconic stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it must have been relatable. The 4 post-it notes goes way back to you being in the place where you're promising to write. You're in the library at the Edinburgh Festival, promising to rehearse.
No, I didn't use post-it notes then. I just
the idea of just going back to the wire with the idea. I mean,
4th person, Woody Allen, just because he's a genius.
Yeah.
And has always made me laugh, and I can't understand anybody who holds anything against a man who, and I've got this written down because it's very good, who can do stuff like sex without love is a meaningless experience, but as meaningless experiences go, it's pretty damn good. Or I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it by not dying. And people divide mostly into the horrible and the miserable. Horrible people, well, they're blind, they're crippled, they're having a terrible time, they're handicapped in some way. Miserable people are putting together flat pack furniture. I mean, the man.
Have you met him and told him that you admire him?
No, I never have, and I wish I had, and I dare say I never will. But he is a genius.
Yes.
I mean, to have made the number of films he's made, and for none of them, I'm trying to think now. Can I name any? Maybe half of one film is not as good as it might be. But otherwise they're great, and some of them are beyond great.
It's sort of comedy gold, which is a resonance of your own.
Sorry,
it's a resonance of your own, because when you
no, it's not. I mean, I've made 2 films, I think. Well, 3 if you count one hundreds of years ago with Richard Burton. So they're my three people who've inspired me. Is that?
Yeah, that's great. Wonderful. Now we're on to the two squirrels. What are your squirrels? Borrow from the film Up. The two is your monsters of distraction, sometimes called shiny object syndrome. So what never fails to stop you in your tracks, Jon Plowman?
Well, this may sound sad in a way because I've already mentioned them, but Dawn and Jennifer, for instance, Saunders, never failed to stop me in their tracks, and sort of tie them up with Bob Spears, and also to tie them up with a question you haven't asked me, but maybe will ask me at some point, is the sort of advice I remember is never shout cut. As soon as you shout cut, you stop. Everything stops.
Yes. What a great yes.
So never shout cut until you absolutely have to. Until you're using too much film and you're going to have to pay a vast amount of money. And some of the best things, certainly that Dawn and Jennifer ever did, were in the moments between reaching the bottom of the page of script and the point where Bob shouted cut. Memorable examples being there's this early-ish sketch where the two of them play the women who hire out animals to television. That's pretty good to begin with. But anyway, the people who hire and they've got a llama that looks just like the Bee Gees. Anyway, they do in a television documentary kind of a way a piece to camera explaining about dogs and how this cat looks like and this dog looks and there comes a point where we're at the end of the sketch and Bob doesn't shout cut, he just lets it roll just to see if there's anything else to be gotten out of this. And what he gets, entirely unrehearsed, entirely never spoken about, is Dawn deciding that, well, this is a bizarre existential moment, but she's decided, and well, she knows that the dog and cat poo on the farm, on the ground, is in fact made of chocolate. So she does what any suffers. Well,
as she would.
She reaches down, takes some, starts to eat it. Now, you could say, and I think I can even remember having to say, yes, of course, we apologize to everybody who's ever been involved in, with children who have accidentally, I understand. We should never have done it, but it's a sort of joyous moment,
of true spontaneity and going full post-it note.
Really, because it's when you're in the middle of something. You're there. You know what I mean?
Yes, you're in the moment.
So you're in the moment, and so it's a good thing to keep that moment going as long as you can.
And what wonderful advice!
Sorry,
never,
I've answered two
no,
questions.
sage advice: never say cut until you absolutely have to. And to have French and Saunders as one of your squirrels is fantastic. That's a great qualification for a squirrel.
Good. Did I write anybody else down? Hang on, sorry.
Second squirrel.
Well, sorry.
Second squirrel. So who else?
Again, two squirrels. Reese Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton, with whom I did. Well, no, that's silly. They did, and I watched while we did Inside Number 9.
Yes.
We did Inside Number 9, having done The League of Gentlemen with Reese and Steve and Mark, and then Psychoville with Reese and Steve and Mark. No, with Reese and Steve and Mark in one episode, but otherwise not. And at the end of that, I remember we went to the controller of BBC Two. There was a nice lady at the time. I mean, it's not to say she's not a nice lady now. I think anyway, we went to her, and you could tell that there was a sort of, oh God, it's these people again, and their weirdnesses. Oh well, some people tell me that the weirdnesses are pretty good, and so Reese and Steve essentially said, what we'd like to do is a series of one-off 30-minute thing, sort of tales of the unexpected.
Yes.
And sometimes tales of the incredibly unexpected. And at least at the very beginning, she said, well, look, could you do that? And could you keep an eye out for the episode that's going to become the next series? You know, so in other words, it's a series of pilots, really.
Yes, yes. All the commonality of Inside Number 9 and all the sort of surreal possibilities.
Yeah, but actually, you think about Inside Number 9, there aren't many things where you think, oh yeah, I'd love another five episodes of people being murdered. I'd love another 5 episodes of strangeness.
Yes.
So in a way, what they wanted to do, and rightly so, was have a go at lots of different things.
Yes.
And the reason I've got them on the list is because they are sort of squirrels. I remember the joy, as it were, of every time a new Inside Number 9 script would arrive, because you were reading it, you know, it's lovely. Somebody's given you a lovely present.
Yes, and then the joy of
short story you can read and
yes.
think, how the hell are we going to do that? And there were only a couple where we thought, we can't do this. There was one, not their fault, just time and money. There was one set in a sort of ghost train through a hall of mirrors, and it just filming that with cameras and keeping the you know, it just looked wildly impossible, B expensive.
So you didn't even try that. It was just
that one. They said, "All right, we'll go and write something else."
Yeah.
and what was remarkable was their ability to write something else. I mean, not just to write 6 episodes, but maybe to write another one just because they had to, you know, extraordinary.
And that's that whole Inside Number 9 chapter has only just come to an end, and now there's the theatre, there's the stage show.
And they've done 9 series for God.
Yes.
And they all said, "Oh well, we'll finish after 9 series," and that means we did what are 9 6s? I seem to
54.
Thank you very much. Why I know came in on budget. 54 episodes.
Yes.
I think there might be a 55th somewhere or other. There's a live one we did. A live Halloween one we did.
Yes.
Anyway. Just so you know, the joy of getting a new script of that.
Yes.
Was brilliant.
And always a perpetual squirrel. They always, I suppose, whenever they knock on your door, that's, oh, the squirrels are here. What have they brought?
Hooray!
What exotic nuts do they bring? How fantastic! So now we're on to the one quirky or unusual fact about you. This is the end of the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A quirky or unusual fact about you, Jon Plowman, we couldn't possibly know about you until you tell us.
Well, okay. Things you couldn't know. Okay, when I was doing Russell Harty's program was done from the Greenwood Theatre. Now, the Greenwood Theatre is in the grounds of Guy's Hospital, and is so called because, and this may be a mistake, a surgeon, I think, left in his will that a new theatre should be built. He didn't specify whether this should be an operating theatre or a theatre. It was built as quite a nice theatre, which viewers will have seen a lot on earlier versions of Question Time, when hosted by the Vicar of Dimbleby, as we.
That's a lovely moniker for Richard Dimbleby, the Vicar of Dimbleby. How clever!
Or
Yes.
David Dimbleby.
David Dimbleby. Yes.
Anyway. Well, sorry, where was it? So the Greenwood Theatre. But what that meant, it being in Guy's Hospital, and Guy's Hospital being near London Bridge, the offices for Russell's show were where the rest of the BBC is or was in Shepherd's Bush. So you had to travel somehow from Shepherd's Bush in West London to Guy's Hospital in East London. Cut a long story short, I'd only been doing this show for about a month and a half when and I'd just come back from Manchester working at Granada, and I didn't know how you got across London reasonably quickly. So I brought with me the motorbike that I had in Manchester. I brought down to London to get across London. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I've said that before, 6 weeks into it, I arrive under the tunnels that take the trains onto London Bridge, and you go through these tunnels and you come out and you're just by Guy's. And you're going from darkness into light, as it were. And what I did not see, possibly, maybe, was a car coming at a reasonable speed across, on the main road. It took the ambulance about 10 minutes to arrive, even from the front of Guy's Hospital to about 100 yards beyond. Anyway. I can show you the injury. I don't know whether
you're now lifting your leg. Very balletic, if I may say so. But oh gosh, you're now showing what looks like a shark bite.
Exactly.
Yes,
the shark bites. Isn't that Mac the Knife? Anyway, sorry.
Can you call it the shark bite?
I was then thrust immediately.
Yeah.
I couldn't produce the show that night. I had to go into hospital. I was in hospital. How long was I in hospital? Quite a while. And various people getting to hear about this, particularly because of Russell's show, odd people would pop up. So Russell popped up, and Alan Bates, I remember, bless him, popped up, and possibly Dawn and Jen, though I'm trying to work out whether I knew them. But anyway, various relatively famous people popped up.
To your bedside. Yeah.
To my bedside. And the nursing staff got quite excited about it. Oh, hooray. Oh, we could move you into a little room of your own if that would help. Which, hooray. Thank you.
It's all about who you know, John, you see. That's what it is.
Exactly. It's about who you know. But the thing I don't think that I've ever led on before is that the then exec producer of the show was a man called Tom Guttridge. And Tom's immediate response to me having broken my leg and being in hospital, his immediate response was, can I get a private phone in next to John's bed so he can carry on doing the show while he's in hospital, and Tom Guttridge, don't have to do it. Thankfully, they couldn't get a private line in next to my bed, and I was allowed to recover. But I offer that as a kind of Good Lord, I never knew that.
Wow. And how indispensable you had become to the world of comedy curation.
How entirely dispensable, I'm sure. And how, even to this day, I can't believe that the accident wasn't partly because I was a bit nervous and worried about doing well.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes. We have, I believe, shaken your tree. That's the clearing, and then the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Now we stay in the clearing, move away from the tree, and next we're going to talk about alchemy and gold, Jon Plowman. And you've been curating gold most of your career, but when you're at purpose and in flow, what are you absolutely happiest doing in what you're here to reveal to the world?
I think I'm happiest watching rehearsals for something, and either let's pick either Absolutely Fabulous or The Vicar of Dibley.
Lovely.
In both instances, it's a joy because there isn't much doubt in the room, as it were, that we're dealing with something that's quite good. So there isn't the usual, oh, this will never work. Oh, I don't want to do. Oh, couldn't I? That none of that's there. There's a good atmosphere in the place.
Yes.
And you're watching things being created. Jennifer, who was notoriously late delivering scripts, would say that part of the reason for that was not wanting to write it down, because once you've written it down, it's there. It's once you've written it, that's it. And so she would say, I can't make it any funnier. I can't make it better once I've written it down. Now, you might say, well, cross it out and write something else. Anyway, you might say that. Ours not to question. But
actually, I wouldn't say that, because I love comedy improvisation and that sort of yes and
way what they were doing, and it was the reason Ruby would arrive of a Wednesday when we were doing the first sort of run through. I say the first run through. Sunday, the week on Ab Fab started Sunday, arrival of scripts, read through. Now, arrival of script in some instances meant, whereas a normal half-hour sitcom script is about 64 pages.
Right.
Some weeks, 12.
Wow.
Including pages that said, don't worry, I'll put some jokes in later. Scene 27, Patsy and Eddie have a row. Don't worry, I'll write it later. No.
Yes.
So by Wednesday, somehow we've got a bit more. And that's when Ruby comes in. And that's when Ruby and Jen go off into a corner and essentially rewrite the whole thing. And so maybe Thursday, and bear in mind, we're recording live in front of an audience, in front of 220 people on Friday evening. So,
wow, we open on Friday.
But there's something rather wonderful about watching the building of that. It's like watching somebody put a house up.
The magic of rehearsal as well is wonderful.
And the Dibley magic is slightly different, because it's the magic of Richard Curtis, and in a way he's the opposite of Jen, in that he can write. He can absolutely. And no, that's not fair. Jen can write, but in a different way.
Yeah.
But Richard can, as it were, commit and commit rather brilliantly. And so what one was watching there is the construction of a different sort of house. Maybe it's more like the construction of a thatched roof on top of a rather beautiful building that's already built.
If I may, I was talking to a friend about interviewing you just this morning. I went out for a coffee and some banana cake slathered in coffee butter. Nom, nom, nom. And he said, and it's lovely. I'd like to give you an analogy about what it's like to be you. You're like a football referee, in that if it wasn't for you as a sort of comedy referee, some of the greatest matches in comedy history wouldn't have happened. So you've just described two very different processes there, how French and Saunders and Ab Fab worked, and then also you've just talked about Vicar of Dibley, which of course Dawn French is the through line for that.
Whereas other things, and in a way, things I'm almost proudest of my bit of are things like W1A and 2012.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Written by John Morton, where he's just a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
And you've got, I was going to say you've got to read what's written on the page, but in a way, the comedy comes from the fact that he's a brilliant writer writing for brilliant actors.
And there's your own preference for anarchy, because when you did Shakespeare, which is ultimately disciplined, supposedly, he's written it, he's quite a good writer, you're trying to double the lines of Polonius. So you love the fact that...
Not necessarily double the lines, but double the time he's on stage saying them. and I nicked that from Graham Garden, who had a character on a show some older listeners may remember called I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again.
Yeah.
I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again, which became I'm Sorry, I Haven't Declared.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again had a character who was very, 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 very old. Yes. Anyway, so I nicked it from a good source.
Yes.
So my
Alchemy and Gold.
Thank you.
And now
is watching gold be created.
Yes. And I hope you like the referee thing. It was a compliment about comedy matches that couldn't have happened without you being the referee.
Well, bless. If I understood football, I'd take it on the chin.
Marvelous. So now I'm going to award you with a cake. Hurrah! You like cake, Jon Plowman?
I do like cake. Funny enough, somebody rang up this morning and said, would we like them to make a cake for tomorrow? But so I will be eating cake tomorrow, whether you like it or not.
Is it your birthday?
No.
Oh, it's just somebody randomly ringing up offering cake.
Who's a good cake maker.
You've got the neighbours from heaven. I love that. So what type of cake have you ordered for tomorrow, or what's your favourite type of cake, John?
I suppose it depends on mood, but a sort of coffee sponge with a thick middle of coffee cream.
Lovely.
Something like that. And obviously coffee icing.
Of course, it shall be yours, metaphorically. And I'm working on actually trying to give people the cakes they want as well. That's a sort of new build for what we're doing. So hopefully I'll furnish you with a coffee cake, literally or metaphorically. Now, you get to put a cherry on the cake now in the construct.
Right. Okay.
What's a favourite inspirational quote that's always given you succor and pulled you towards your future?
I'm sure I've written this down.
You gave us some brilliant Woody Allen quotes earlier on, but this is more about your own inspiration.
Sorry. Pass the goal. Oh, no, that's what I'm doing in a minute.
I love that you're reading your notes on what is this structure about.
So, sorry, ask me the question again.
What's the favourite inspirational quote that's always given you succor and pulled you towards your future? Could have been a bit of advice from somebody, however you frame that.
Never give a sucker an even break, I think.
Pardon?
Never give a sucker an even break.
Never give a sucker an even break, did you say?
Yeah.
I like that.
No, and I don't mean it. Favorite quote. I always remember, and I'll get the quote wrong, but I always remember that the first scene of The Office, and I was the person who said yes to The Office somehow.
Wow.
Largely because saying no to Gervais is always tricky. And I remember him coming in and saying, my friend and my friend has been on the BBC Directors course and was obviously
Stephen Marchant, I'm assuming. Yeah.
And we've made this little bit of stuff to show you what the show will be like, and it'll be great. And the confidence oozing out of the two of them, but particularly out of Ricky, was extraordinary. Anyway, I always remember that thing where he's got a guy in the office, and he's saying, "Have you passed the test for the sorry." Thing that lifts things.
Photocopier.
No.
No.
Bigger.
Photocopier, but bigger. Pass the test for the forklift truck?
Thank you. Good. You see, you got there. Thank you. Yeah. Have you passed the forklift test truck? Have you passed the forklift truck test?
It's very easy for you to say.
And exactly. And then he picks up the phone and says, "Hang on, give me a second." And the guy says, "Is this the guy who does the test?" Does the test. He wrote the test. I gave him the job. And it's just and Gervais, meanwhile, is doing a long nose, I'm lying a lot nose. It's joyous, and it's joyous, particularly on a when you get something that arrives like that.
Yes,
it's already there.
Was that part of the
pilot? There, if only I could remember it.
Was that the pilot? That was in the pilot episode as well, was it?
Yeah,
partly what the first sort of test beta version of what they did.
Yeah.
And again, the rest is history from that regard as well, because obviously Steve Merchant, and so you said you greenlit something that presumably he felt was a sliding door for him.
No, the truth is, I didn't greenlight it because if you greenlight something, you agree in a way to pay for it. All I did was take it to BBC Two and say, "This is jolly good. We should give it a go," and we did.
Yes. And I'm sure you will be a sliding door for Ricky Gervais as well because of that as well. Absolutely. With the gift of hindsight, Jon, now, what is what notes, help, or advice might you proffer to a younger version of yourself?
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, because worrying never does any good. So don't worry about it.
Love that. And now we're ramping up shortly to talk about legacy through Shakespeare and the 7 Ages of Man speech. But just before we do, I've got something called Pass the Golden Bat moment, please. From Mr. Mannering. So having experienced this rather surreal sound storyscape for yourself, who would you most like to, Mr. Mannering, who would you most like to pass the golden baton along to keep the golden thread of the storytelling going?
Well, I think either Reese or Steve, because they've got a lot, they've done a lot and they know a lot and they're jolly good.
Yeah.
And they could try and have a baton between them, as it were. Or my friend Jeff Greenstein. Now, my friend Jeff Greenstein is an American. He's 6'8".
Wow.
He wrote, he was showrunner for Will and Grace. And he's a very good writer, and he's a very nice guy. And he wrote on Friends, and he wrote lots of things. And Will and Grace was the thing he wrote on for longest and was showrunner of. And he doesn't really. He's sort of semi-retired, but he's sometimes gettable in England.
Sometimes, I love that. Sometimes gettable in England. Lovely. So if I may be greedy, I'd love to grab both of those squirrels and bite your arm off both of those. That's wonderful. And a very small world wouldn't want to hoover it. Did you know I was at the Central School of Speech and Drama the year after French and Saunders left? Because they did the teaching degree like me back in the day. And then
George Hall, was he still
there? George Hall was the principal. But I wasn't doing the acting course at that point. I was doing the teaching degree. And then just another
Dawn and Jennifer.
Yes. And then one other connection. I grew up in Uganda, and I happened to be best friends with Adrian Edmondson's 2 younger brothers, Matthew and Alistair. And so I met Adrian Edmondson round about that time as well.
Yeah.
Small world.
Hooray, small world.
Wouldn't want to hoover it, as they say. So thank you so much for those golden patterns. That's great. So now, inspired by Shakespeare, we'll get onto that shortly, but I'd just like to do an exciting bit, which is called Show Us Your QR Code, please. If the audience are watching this, I'd like to point you to, and you can tell us a little bit about this. You have is it every week that you're doing Jon Plowman's What's Funny About? Or is it?
No, and it's wrong to call it Jon Plowman's because Peter Fincham and I do this thing in Peter Fincham's shed in Notting Hill. Something's popped up on my screen.
Yes, it's a QR code for the audience to just. I put in the URL of where you can get the show. Well, so it's an exciting bit called "Show Us Your QR Code." Apologies for not putting
Jon Plowman's What's Funny About. We've now done, I think, 24 of them, something like that, and they're me and him talking to people who've had very successful comedies on telly and saying essentially why, how, what's funny about.
So, and are you dipping into your own canon for that as well, I'm assuming?
Yeah. Only because it's,
it'll be very difficult to avoid it.
We've done John Cleese, we've done the Dairy Girls, we've done quite a few people who we've had. We did Jonathan Lynn the other day, who co-wrote Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. We've done lots of people with whom we had nothing to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what's funny about is a regular BBC Sound, and that's the QR code for that.
It's on BBC Radio 4. It's just finished a series, but it was, if you're looking for it via Sounds.
I believe that's where the QR code goes. It goes to a URL on the BBC.
Very good.
And then here comes another one. If you want to look at Jon Plowman's extraordinary career.
Now, curiously, that photograph has, I can't see it really in detail, but I think is very close to the hammock.
Of the clearing.
Yeah. So you may see a bit of snow on a bit of mountains in the back.
Love that. So this is to you on Wikipedia. So I was just showing that. So what I'd like to do now, we've done the clearing the tree, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the alchemy, the gold, the couple of random squirrels. We're now ramping up via cake, which we've done as well, onto Shakespeare.
All right.
Legacy now. Jon Plowman, when all is said and done, how would you most like to be remembered?
Well, I don't particularly want to be remembered, but I wouldn't mind some of the shows I've done being remembered and still funny. And I have a feeling that a few of them are. I think that probably there's enough in AdFab that's kind of not of its day to still be funny in 20 years' time. And there's enough in The Vicar of Dibley, even though women will it will be less of an amazement that there are women vicars. I think there's enough in that to make it last. I hope there's enough in John Morton's stuff like 2012 and W1A, in which Hugh Vonnegut starred as modern man who runs things and gets in a flap about it. Guess dumb. No. So I'd hope there's a bit of legacy there.
About the true test of comedy, lasting the test of time, which the greatest comedies do. Yes.
Yes. I mean, if you think about it, I will happily watch Dad's Army of a night.
Yeah.
When there's nothing else on, and it's on UK Gold, a station that recently employed me to make an 82-minute documentary about Absolutely Fabulous. But
that's a great. Your legacy is secure, if I may say so.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And so now, as this has been your moment in the sunshine in the Good Listening To show, Jon Plowman.
Indeed, it has. Looking around. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you. Thank you to all the people who've watched things, to all the people who've as it were, thought that it wasn't an impossible idea that I might lead them down a reasonable path towards something or other. And thank you to everybody who's listened and watched.
And just to reincorporate, Matt Lucas back in the day called you, well, for reasons I understand, called you the godfather of comedy, the Godfather.
Yes, although I don't have a toilet that has a gun.
Quite right too. But lots of cocaine on the system. That's the important thing, obviously. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Chris Grimes, but most importantly, this has been Jon Plowman. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a great joy. Just if you would like a conversation about being in the show too, this is just a quick bit of patter about the show. The website for my show is thegoodlisteningtoshow.com. If you'd also like to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can do that too. A couple of QR codes flashing about too. But just want to say a sincere, hefty, enormous thank you to, Jon Plowman.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.
And it's been a pleasure for me. Sorry. Yes. It's another bit of Woody Allen. Good. All right.
Let's say that again. Sorry, I was cutting across.
Oh, no, there's a sequence in Love and Death, a much underrated film, which for me is his funniest because it's the sort of most tightly written. He didn't really like it because it happened in a foreign land, not in New York. And it's a pastiche of Love and Death, of War and Peace. There's a bit of dialogue that it's a greater honor for me. No, it's a greater honor for me. No, it's a greater. Very funny. Anyway, sorry. Watch it. It's very good.
Lovely. And also that was us proving that don't say cut because that was worth it. That was an extra bit of gold at the end.
Yes, exactly. Hooray.
And that was wonderful advice to the future. So you can leave us with your best. What's your most sage-like advice to future executive producers of comedy?
Carry on laughing.
Thank you very much indeed. End stream. I press a button now, which is like we're both stopping weeing now. End stream.
Hooray.